This is the first time, Professor Marandi, I think you will accept that we haven't seen for 46 years of the Iranian, in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, this is the first time Iran coming out and saying that if you attack Lebanon, if you attack Hezbollah, we're going to respond. This is the new strategy. This is the new sort of attitude that is coming out of the war because of the reality of what has happened so far and how they have used. We know what has happened in Syria. Syria was a very different case because Bashar Assad somehow gave up and he decided not to fight back, not to help. You remember we talked about Syria and how Iran wanted to help Syria, but they didn't want it. Bashar Assad didn't want it.
Not because Iran was a fan of Bashar al-Assad himself. Iran couldn't care less. And this is something that those sectarian proxies of the United States and the Qataris and the Saudis, that those who are on the payroll and who have TV channels and who have think tanks and who have institutes and things like that, and have been working for the empire and against the government in Syria during the last decade and a half, they were trying to make this a sectarian issue because they wanted to justify their cooperation with the empire. And just like in Lebanon, when Michel Aoun speaks about Iran or others, they're trying to justify a position that they know is not moral and not correct. So these sectarian people, they know, that their politics are to the benefit of Israel, but they have to, the Israeli regime, but they have to justify it. And so they would say this is sectarian. For Iran, Assad, it didn't matter at all what his sect was or what his religion was. What Iran knew was that the attempt to overthrow him was a CIA-led operation. And it was started by, it was approved by Obama. And so Iran stood against it. And when they brought in Western intelligence agencies, brought tens of thousands of foreign fighters, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Jaish al-Islam, and all these other Takfiri extremist groups, Iran stood against them because they knew that this was, the intention was to destroy Syria, to destroy the axis of resistance, and that the regime that would benefit would be the Israeli regime. And that's why Netanyahu considers what happened to happen in Syria a great achievement. And imagine if they did not carry out this dirty war in Syria, if these the proxies, the U.S. proxies in Qatar and elsewhere did not play the role that they did, and if these people on the payroll did not cooperate the way in which they did, and all those foreign terrorists, if they had not been in Syria, imagine what the situation would have been today. The resistance would have been much more powerful. The Israeli regime is already overstretched. It would have been much worse. But now look at the situation. In this, the Syrian government is cooperating to try to shut the border with Lebanon to strangle Hezbollah and the resistance. And you see all those pro-ISIS and Al-Qaeda people in London and in the West and elsewhere, these pro-Syrian activists, they're all quiet. They're looking away, looking at the clouds and the nice weather. They're not going to talk about the collaboration of Giuliani with Trump because they know what that means, and they know that they had a key role. They all are complicit in what happened, and thus they're complicit in whatever successes the Zionist regime had.
I think that's the main reason that for Iran to come out and talk about the situation with Lebanon, because what is going on in Lebanon. They want to make some sort of civil war in Lebanon, and when the chaos come out, the same scenario as we've been witnessing in Syria. Today is the same way. They're trying to make some sort of civil war, and the people fighting each other, different sects of the society fighting each other, and you go in and you capture more land. And this is the same sort of playbook for Israel. And again, they want to do this in Lebanon. What was the main change right now is that Hezbollah is capable of fighting back using drones, using FPV drones and rockets. So when you're not capable, Israelis are not capable to fight back, they want to hit Dahieh. Here comes the Iranian sort of new strategy, which is so important, in my opinion, that I've mentioned. We haven't seen this before. Iran says, if you attack Dahieh, if you level Dahieh, we're going to level the northern part of Israel. This is new for.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, for anyone to say that Iran is sacrificing Lebanon, Iran is basically saying that we're going back to war for the sake of Lebanon. They know that they're talking nonsense, and they know that the government in Lebanon is not capable and is not willing to take a stand against the Israeli regime. The government in Lebanon has never even sought the ability to protect their people against the Israeli regime. But these people are bound to the West. It's the same thing as we see in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in the Emirates, and elsewhere. These are regimes that are bound to the West. These are leaders that are bound to the West. Their allegiance is to the West. Even in Europe, you see how the European leaders are bound to the United States, let alone these weak proxies in West Asia or North Africa. But in any case, and Hezbollah, by the way, it's not just the drones or the rockets; it's also the ambushes. They've been carrying out a very sophisticated and effective war against the Israeli regime. And of course, as you rightly point out, the Israeli regime in its rage goes and bombs apartment blocks. And the West is quiet about it. I mean, just yesterday we saw, I think, a 7-month-old child, infant, shot in the head by the Israeli regime in the West Bank. And we saw how it was either ignored in the Western media or they tried to justify it. It's really despicable what the Western media is. I've unfollowed any Western media outlet, legacy media outlet. I don't listen. I don't get my news from them at all anymore. I don't waste my time on them because they're just propaganda. But Israel is not going to win in Lebanon, and ultimately it's going to fail. The question is, how long will it take? Just like the U.S. war against Iran and the siege warfare, the United States wants to strangle Iran and it wants to outweight Iran. Yes, it can continue trying to do that, but at the end of the day, the United States is going to fail, and it's only going to create greater harm to the global economy and the U.S. economy. And the U.S. has much more to lose than Iran does. So Iran will definitely outweigh the United States, no matter how difficult things are in the months ahead. And Hezbollah will outweigh the Israeli regime, no matter how difficult things get in the weeks and months ahead. And I think that Netanyahu is in very serious trouble. And as I said earlier, I think the Axios has zero credibility, but the Axios report on the phone conversation between Trump and Netanyahu, I think there's more in there that meets the eye. I think this was intended to perhaps intended to weaken Netanyahu in the upcoming election.
I think the new report on NBC News, it says the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency has raised the threat level of Israeli spying on American officials to the highest level.
What was it before? Like 99.999% is now 99.9999%. Like, what has changed? I mean, I think John Kiriakou somewhere said that they already have like, I think he said something like this. They already have 99% of all the information in the United States. There really isn't much that they don't know. They apparently listen in on the president's phone conversations.
Yeah. But the reason I mentioned this is that the war is not going well, so the blame game is starting. Who's to blame for this disaster that has happened? Is it going to be Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it going to be someone in the Trump administration, Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio? I don't know who's going to be to blame, because this is when you're winning, everyone is just, they're all coming together. But this is right, and what's going on, as you mentioned with the case of Benjamin Netanyahu, I think he's in the process of learning that he's going to be responsible for what has happened in the Middle East. And Donald Trump is not going to accept the responsibility of this disastrous war of choice against Iran.
Again, I'm speculating, but Hegseth isn't important, nor is Rubio. These are just, pawns that can be thrown in the bin or the trash can. But I think that the Israeli regime is despised. What Axios has attributed to Trump is a fact that everyone hates Israel, the Israeli regime, and everyone hates the Netanyahu. So if I was a Zionist, God forbid, if I was a monstrous human being like a Zionist, I would want to remove Netanyahu, and I would want to put someone in his place who's just as sinister and evil, because the opposition to Netanyahu is just like Netanyahu. They're genocidal. They too want Dahiyeh and Beirut to be flattened. They too want genocide in Gaza. I mean, they're the same thing. But if I was a Zionist in the United States, I would be very worried about the future. Very worried. Because the world hates me. And the world hates my ethno-supremacism. And so what I would do is I would try to put the blame on someone on Netanyahu. And I would try to get rid of Netanyahu. And I would try to replace him with someone just as sinister and evil, but pretend that it wasn't him. And that, the Western media can then collectively say that this is a new beginning, and the excesses or whatever, because they can't say genocide, the excesses of Netanyahu and the crimes committed by, or the controversial Netanyahu, his exit from power is a good thing, and it shows that the Israeli people are reasonable people who don't want genocide. And all lies, of course. But this is what I would do. I would try to get him removed. I would have him try to make sure he loses the next election, and that a coalition is formed without Netanyahu. It could include his current allies with his opponents or elements of his from within his allies, and elements from within his opponents, or just his opponents, depending on the results. And then I would try to give the Israeli regime a facelift, and perhaps back down on some of these fronts, like in Gaza or Lebanon, and probably preserve what I've gained in Syria or something like that. So again, this is just sheer speculation. But if I was, God forbid, a Zionist, that's what I would do. And I think that this whole, NBC report or the Axios piece, all of this sort of fits into this. Something is wrong with the Israeli regime, and of course it's not Zionism, but I think it all helps to weaken Netanyahu.
You've mentioned, Professor Marandi, that Iran is using the older missiles. They're using in the recent attack on Kuwait and Bahrain, because there's the footage is coming out of Iran. It shows that Iran has used a MOD missile, which is MRBM, middle range ballistic missile, instead of using SRBM, short range ballistic missile. Is that part of that plan, to use the older missiles, less accurate missiles, in this sort of response to the United States that are not that much important? It's some sort of response to the United States. Is not, they're not going to be. And what is it? Because people are asking, why do they need to use middle range ballistic missiles? Why not? Because Kuwait is so close to Iran. Why is that?
Well, for a number of reasons. One is that they want to rid themselves of older missiles. Second is that they're testing the air defenses, and they're testing their own missiles to see how they would perform against air defenses. So all of these are factors that that they use. So for them, it's important to see what capabilities these regimes have, because if the war is restarted, Iran is going to start pounding these regimes. So they'll use different missiles. They'll fire from different parts of the country. They'll try to preserve newer missiles and use up their older missiles. They can't keep those missiles forever. And if, in a few years, they'll just be useless. So during the war, they prioritized these older missiles, and they used them during the first few weeks. During the first couple of weeks, they were basically using the older missiles. So yeah, it's part of their strategy. The Iranian missile numbers are so huge now, and they're so large in number that they can. They in some places they just don't have enough space for the older missiles and drones. The same is true with drones. The Iranians now have a lot more drones than they had at the beginning.
There is something we talked with.
And by the way, they're building new underground bases as we speak.
Yeah. Before coming to this live, we were talking about it because there are people, we have to talk about it because there are people right now talking about Iranian, some reports showing that Iranian President Pezeshkian told his counterpart in Pakistan that Iran gonna get out of NPT, if the escalations happens, Iran gonna, they're going to do some sort of experiment of the nuclear bomb and nuclear explosion in Iran, somewhere in the desert, and to show the United States that Iran has the capabilities of the using nuclear weapons if they attacked by nuclear weapons from Israel. And what is your understanding of that? And how do you see the whole case of Iran pursuing nuclear bombs or pursuing nuclear weapons?
Nima, there are some things I know a lot about, and there are some things I know a little bit about, and there are some things I know very little about. So, for example, when it comes to some in Iranian politics and Iranian foreign policy, I know some things. I don't claim to be an expert. And when it comes to like military matters, like drones and missiles, I have connections. I know a thing or two about Iran's missile capabilities, its drone capabilities, the general things, not details. I don't want to know details. I don't want to know anything secret. But when it comes to the nuclear issue, I don't know anything that's secret. So I cannot go out and categorically make any statement about Iran's nuclear program based on some knowledge that I have, which is non-existent. What I can say is that if Iran wanted to develop a nuclear weapon, it would have developed it years ago. This is not me saying it. This is Dr. Kharazi saying it. He was martyred, of course, during the war. He was 8 years. For 8 years, he was the foreign minister of Mr. Khatami, and then he became the leader's foreign policy advisor, one of two foreign policy advisors, him and Dr. Velayati, and he runs an important think tank, ran an important think tank before he was martyred. He said that Iran could, he said this in public a couple of times, at least, that Iran could have built a nuclear weapon a long, long time ago. And he said this a few years ago, like 2-3 years ago. So, yes, Iran could easily develop a nuclear weapon through its own indigenous capabilities. It's not easy. It's not difficult for Iran. It's not a problem. And now Iran is more technologically advanced than it was years ago. So, that's not a problem for you. And of course, Iran's missile program is we see how effective it was. They defeated the United States and the Israeli regime in 2 wars. So that's not a big issue. The issue, and of course, the issue is what Dr. Larijani, who was also martyred in this war, and a person who I personally knew and I liked a lot, a very, very good man. So the same was true with Dr. Harazi, but people always spoke highly of him. But Dr. Larijani, I knew personally more than I knew Dr. Harazi. Dr. Larijani, before he became the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, he said on television once that, if I'm not mistaken, this was a couple of years back, he said that Iran has no intention of developing a nuclear weapon, but if, I think he said something like, and I think maybe Dr. Harazi said something like this too. I'm growing old and I forget, so people have to look this up. But he said something like, if Iran's faces an existential threat, then Iran would reconsider its nuclear posture. I don't see Iran facing an existential threat at the moment, right? So that's A. I cannot comment on what the Pakistani official said to our friends because I know that Larry and Pepe are 2 very honest people, very serious analysts, and they would report what they say with great accuracy. And I'm sure the person they spoke with is a person who must have some credibility or some status in Pakistan which makes them take him seriously. But I don't know that person, and I don't know what the motives are for him to say this. All I can say, and so I can't say it's wrong because I don't have evidence. But what I can say is this. First, an introduction. Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei gave a fatwa against nuclear weapons, and this has a history. His predecessor, Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, gave a fatwa against chemical weapons at a time when the West gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against Iranians and killed many, many people and maimed many, many people. And of course, these Arab regimes that are complicit now, back then they funded Saddam's war machine. They helped with the chemical weapons program and other such programs, and the means of delivery for those chemical weapons. So back then, and the West was trying to prevent Iran from even purchasing gas masks. So back then, they went and told Imam Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, that we need to develop new chemical weapons, and he said no. He said deal with this monstrous enemy, and I'm saying this, in any way you can, but you can't have weapons of mass destruction. You can't have chemical weapons. They're inhumane. So Ayatollah Khamenei, his successor, the next leader, he gave a fatwa against nuclear weapons many years ago. And that stands. Now, in Shia ideology, there are some differences with Sunni jurisprudence. In Shia jurisprudence or ijtihad, the gates are open. In Sunni Islam, the gates to ijtihad are closed. They've been closed for well over 1,000 years. But for Shia, the gates to ijtihad are open. And so that means that time and place are key components in the decisions made by the mujtahid, the jurisprudent, the scholar of Islamic law. So, for example, based upon his knowledge and, just like a senior scholar in any field, his knowledge of Islam and jurisprudence, he has to take the factor of time and place into consideration. So his ruling about whatever religious law in Brazil may be different from in India, and it may be different from in Iran, and it may be different from South Africa, right? So place has an important role to play. Context, society, the society they're in, circumstances. Time is also a factor. What was appropriate for the 19th century is different from the 20th century, is different from the 21st century. Again, it is founded in that knowledge of Islam and jurisprudence, but these factors have a role to play. That's what makes the gates to Ejtihad being open makes the rulings dynamic, while preserving those essences, those core essences of Islamic values. So the ruler now, the person, the wali faqih, the leader now is another person. It is a third leader, Ayatollah Seyed Mujtaba Khamenei. He is also a jurisprudent. He is also a mujtahid. He can give his own ruling based on time, place, and his knowledge of Islam, and the circumstances that he sees that surround the nation or around the issue that's under discussion. He can produce a different fatwa. It could be different from Ayatollah Khamenei's fatwa. Ayatollah Khamenei's fatwa stands, but he can have a different fatwa, and he is the leader now. But I don't see any indication of that. I don't see any indication in the public sphere that the state, that the government wants to shift policy. Because until now, all that I've seen over the years is the government trying to tell the people that a nuclear weapon is not a good thing, and why we do not want a nuclear weapon. Even though some MPs, members of parliament, some people would go out, or clerics, or I don't know, other public figures would say we need nuclear weapons, but the state, high-ranking officials, military officials, all of them would go out of their way in the public to say that we do not need nuclear weapons. So before the 12-day war, as I recall, it was roughly 50-50 usually in polling in Iran. Like half the people wanted nuclear weapons, half didn't. And that was, of course, the state or the government, and people were saying we don't need them. After the 12-day war, the government position didn't change, but the polls that I saw after the war clearly showed the majority of Iranians wanted a nuclear. I would imagine, and I have not seen polls since this war began, and I know polls have been taken. I don't know if this question was among them, but I haven't seen any poll results. I would imagine that even a larger majority of Iranians believe we need nuclear weapons. And my anecdotal experience says that, because when I'm on the streets and like I'm shopping or walking or doing something and people approach me, usually they say we need a nuclear weapon. But the state has not moved in that direction at all. I have not seen any indication whatsoever that the government, the state, the armed forces, and of course the Supreme National Security Council and the leader have shifted their position. And I don't see a reason at the moment why they should, because I don't see Iran being under some sort of existential threat, especially after the results of this war. So I don't see why Iran would need to even explode a nuclear weapon. I mean, what would be the need? With the technology that exists today, simulations work very effectively. I don't think there's a need for anyone to even waste a nuclear weapon if they really need one on such an experiment. So I don't see any evidence of this, but I continue to watch Larry Johnson. He's one of the few people who I would watch if I have a very little time during the day and I want to watch someone. He's one of the people who I want to watch. And of course, the same is true with Pepe. And for me, they're extremely credible. And I cannot say that what that Pakistani person claimed is incorrect, because I'm not in the know. And if it's not correct, it doesn't reflect upon either Larry Johnson or Pepe Escobar.
Yeah, but we know there's serious discussions in Iran about NPT. What is the meaning of NPT? If we are attacked, if the Bushehr nuclear power plant is attacked and the enemy doesn't consider any sort of, limits for what they
Yes,
do.
yes, but just one thing, and I know you know this, and I know much of your audience knows this, but if Iran leaves the NPT, it is as leverage. It is to punish the United States and the West. It doesn't mean that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon. It will make it more difficult for them to understand Iran's nuclear program. What does it mean? I mean, someone recently, I think it was like Channel 4 News or someone said, I think it was them a couple of weeks ago. They said, why did Iran produce enriched uranium at 60%? I said, well, you have to remember the history. There's a context to this. Iran signed a nuclear deal in 2015. It gave many concessions. The Americans under Obama cheated Iran. Under Trump, they tore up the deal. For 2 years, Iran continued to abide by its commitments while it was under maximum pressure sanctions in full violation of the deal. The Europeans and the Americans were all imposing maximum pressure sanctions. And so after New Year, 2 years, the Iranians renewed their nuclear program. And in order to put pressure on the West to come back to the negotiating table, what did they do? They increased the enrichment, the percentage, the degree to which uranium is enriched to 60%. So it was for leverage. It was to force them to come back to the negotiating table and to get concessions. When the other side has sanctioned you, what do you put on the table to force them to remove sanctions? You put something on the table. One of the things that Iran put on the table is enrichment of uranium at 60%. So if Iran leaves the NPT, doesn't mean Iran wants to build a nuclear weapon, but it wants to make life more difficult for the West. So the smart thing for the West to do is to accept what Robert Kagan, and you told me about his interview a couple of days ago, which you promised to send me a link after the show. I haven't seen it, but I did read his article in The Atlantic, where in the monthly, where he said the United States lost, accept defeat, accept Iran, going back to the book, Going to Tehran by the Leverett, which I talk about a lot, and then you can normalize. You can have a different situation. Is that going to happen? No, of course not. And not with this U.S. regime and not with these current elites. But the world changes. Look at Iran and the Soviet Union. We had terrible relations. In their rallies, the Iranians would chant death to America and death to the Soviet Union. And of course, it's not literal. No one should take it literally. They're referring to the empire and imperialism. It's just like saying he bit the dust doesn't mean he ate the dirt. But in any case, they used to say the same for the Soviet Union. And then after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan and their policies changed, people no longer chanted that in their rallies. And of course, later the Soviet Union collapsed, and relations with Russia today are infinitely better than back then. So it's not as if this hostility towards Iran's tormentors will be forever. If those tormentors are gone and decent people replace them, you can have the sort of relations between Iran and the United States as we have today between Iran and Russia and Iran and China. That's a hypothetical. We're nowhere close to that.
I think one of the points that General Rezai in his interview on CNN said is that the first step would be $24 billion of Iranian frozen assets for Iranians if they want to start to show some sort of move that Iran gets the sign that the United States is serious to start with, to start the negotiation, to start some sort of deal. They have to start with the Iranian frozen assets, which we know this is the Iranian assets, by the way. It's not the United States assets. We know that the Iranian delegation, the head of the Iranian parliament, together with the foreign minister and the head of Central Bank of Iran, they went to Qatar, which was part of this frozen Iranian asset. What do we know about that so far?
Well, the issue, Nima, is clear. The Iranians are saying, we don't trust you. You're liars. And they are. We saw that in the JCPOA. Obama, who's no better than Trump. Just Trump is more crude and disgusting in his sinister behavior. Obama is more sophisticated, more hypocritical. But he too cheated Iran. At every step of the way, he cheated Iran. And all our dealings with the regime in Washington, the United States lied to you. Always, always. From the beginning of the revolution till now. So the Iranians this time round are saying, look, we have the Strait of Hormuz. We won the war. There's nothing you can do about it. You want a deal, you first have to carry out your obligations. Show us that you're serious, and we'll carry out our obligations. It's our money. Hand it over. You don't hand it over, there's no deal. You want a deal? First, stop killing Lebanese children and get out of the country. You want a deal? Show us. But Iran is not going to say, okay, let's sign up and we'll do this, and then you promise to give us the money and you promise to stop killing kids in Lebanon. Of course they won't do that. They'll wait for Iran to carry out their obligations, and as usual, they'll continue killing kids. And Western media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, all of them will pretend that, this is a very complicated situation in Lebanon, and it's very difficult to figure out who's to blame. Killing tens of thousands of kids in Gaza, just like it was difficult to determine who's to blame and all that in the West for Western media. So Iran knows that history will repeat itself if they don't negotiate differently this time around. So the Iranians have learned from their mistakes in dealing with the West and saying that, we always carry out our obligations. You're the ones who don't carry out your obligations. You want to deal with Iran? Show us you're serious. If you're serious, we promise you the Strait of Hormuz will be open. And we all know that Iran will open the Strait of Hormuz. Because everyone knows Iran carries out its obligations. Everyone knows it. The only nutcases like the Zionists in the United States, what's that guy's name? Levin, or what was his name? The crude Zionists, or Pompeo and these people.
Lindsey Graham?
No. Yeah, well, Lindsey Graham. Yeah, they say these are liars. They're they can say whatever nonsense they want. But whenever Iran had an agreement, Iran carried out its obligation. Too much. Iran did too much. Too much. I mean, after the U.S., Trump tore up the deal, and the Europeans effectively carried out Trump's orders and imposed maximum pressure sanctions, Iran effectively waited 2 years. I wouldn't have done that. Maybe they did the right thing, but I wouldn't have waited 2 years. But that just shows that the problem never lied in Tehran. The problem was never in Tehran. So this time around, the Iranians are saying, you have to show us goodwill. It's our money. You have to hand over our money. And yes, we'll open up the Strait of Hormuz to those ships that belong to those countries that help kill our kids.
Considering the two fronts, one of them between Iran and the United States in the Persian Gulf, and the other between Israel and Lebanon, which one is more difficult to, for the United States to agree on? The Iranian demands between Israel and Hezbollah, or the demands in the Persian Gulf, with the case of the Strait of Hormuz? Which one is more difficult in your understanding?
No doubt, Lebanon. No doubt, Lebanon. Because that's what Netanyahu. I mean, we had a ceasefire after the war. Before we went to Islamabad, they agreed that there would be a ceasefire, and that the ships would go through the strait. A large number of ships would go through the Strait of Hormuz, and that there would be a ceasefire in Lebanon. And then Netanyahu carpet bombed Lebanon. And Trump then said, "Oh well, Lebanon is not a part of the ceasefire." And the Pakistanis said, "Well, of course they are. You agreed on this." And so Trump was willing to, I guess, at least up to that point, to carry out other obligations, but not with regards to Lebanon. He wanted to allow the Israelis to kill kids, as they do. They're good at it. So the Iranians said no. So I think the fact that Zionists like killing kids is a big problem.
Yeah. we've heard Yemen saying that they're prepared if they attack Dahiya, we're going to be part of the response. It's not going to be just Iran.
Nima, the axis of resistance is going to be very different in the next war than it was in the 39-day war. It will be very different.
Yeah.